Okay, so maybe a slightly different video I'll be talking about here. I want to talk about the Tampa Bay linebackers and just, it's not just linebackers, but them specifically, and what you're supposed to do over the middle of the field and why they kind of suck at zone coverage and why they're so good at man but can struggle at zone. A lot of it is mental. No long intro, let's just get into it. We'll start off with this play. What's going to happen on this play is it's a cover 3 zone. And in fairness, a couple plays I'm going to show are cover 3. I imagine Tampa Bay is going to run a lot more cover 2 in this game. But at the same time, and I can get into that more, I've talked about it before in previous videos, but at the same time, you can't just run one coverage all game. This is setting up as though it's going to be 2 safeties deep, but they will be running cover 3. So who do you cover if you're the Tampa Bay players over the middle of the field? Well, usually you already know who you're supposed to cover. So I've numbered each of these 3 Kansas City receivers. I didn't come up with these numbers. This is what you use in football terminology. So sorry if I'm talking down to some of you. I'm sure plenty of you notice, plenty of you don't know this as well. I didn't know it for a while. Is that, because I didn't play football, I just watched a lot of football. Is the way this works, though, is you have, you're numbered from the outside ends. So closest to the sideline to closest to the offensive line. That's how you're numbered. So 1, 2, 3. So now I've numbered those 3 Tampa Bay players because you would think that, okay, well, those 3 just go over and cover the receivers 1, 2, and 3 for Kansas City. That's how it works. Makes sense. Obviously, we all get it. And then, there's only one eligible receiver to Mahomes' right, which is the bottom of the screen. So you don't really worry about him too much. But therein lies the obvious issue, right? What do you do about the halfback who, he's the number 4 receiver. I don't have him numbered, but he's the number 4 receiver. He's also on that side. And you have Travis Kelce, who, spoiler alert, is going to run over to Mahomes' left. So you're going to end up with 5 receivers to the left. So how do you handle that with just 3 guys? Watch. So Mahomes takes the snap. You now have 5 eligible receivers. So they're, all numbered now. And also worth mentioning, I have the numbers, but what's interesting about the numbers and what you need to know is that they change. So I said you usually know who you're supposed to cover, but that's only kind of a suggestion because oftentimes routes cross each other and you have to make sure that you cover the right guys. So you now have 5 eligible receivers, 1 through 5. Who do you cover if you're Tampa Bay? You only have 3 guys in that area, right? What do you do? Well, first, those 2 safeties could just come in and they could take away the 2 Kansas City players running deep routes. That's what you should do. And that could actually be huge, as if you take away those 2 players, well, now you've gotten rid of 2 of the 5 guys and you're back to just 3. So great. The 2 deep Kansas City players, they are taken away by the, safety and defensive back who are deep. And now I've renumbered all of the 3 Kansas City players, 1, 2, 3. Well, what's the issue here? Why are there still guys getting open? Well, keep in mind what you're supposed to do. What is your assignment? You cover, if you're the person in charge of covering the number 1 receiver, who's the player in the flat, he covers the number 1 receiver. He's supposed to always cover the number 1 receiver. Now the receivers have changed, but you still have to find a way to cover the number 1 receiver. Same thing with the number 2 receiver, same thing with the number 3 receiver, but the obvious issue is they've changed. So you think you're supposed to cover someone, now you have to cover someone else. That's an issue. So if they all did that, which is what now I have suggested, well, that's difficult, right? I mean, the number 1 receiver, he's kind of covered. The issue is that the number 2 receiver is currently getting covered by Levante David, who is currently on the strong side, which is the side closest to the tight end, which is the bottom of the screen, and Devin White, who I would rather have covering the middle of the field, according to this graphic, is further away because he went over to cover the number 1 receiver, and I really do think that it was Devin White is maybe the guy who I would put the most blame on. I think he's the guy who he had to get over. He had to read this. Once he reads that situation and that 2 receivers are running deep, he now has to try and get back over towards the middle of the field. It's a tough read, though. It's hard to blame him. That's why Kansas City is really good, because they put you in these situations. So then what do? You can make a perfect read, but that's not always going to happen. What else can you do? Well, you can have other guys help you out. I mean, it's not like you only have 3 players in the game. You do have 7 guys in coverage. So, 2 are helping out deep. What about the other 2? Tampa Bay's deep safety could run over there and he could crash in and try and take away that route, which actually is going to be what he ends up trying to do on this play. And honestly, Sean Murphy-Bunting could run over and he could cover Kelce, which I know seems crazy because he's in charge of covering the flat all the way to Mahomes' right. But keep in mind, there is no eligible receiver on that side of the field. So that's something you can do. Obviously, the issue with doing that is that now Mahomes can run, if he can scramble and get to the outside, he can run for a million miles. But at the same time, your job as a secondary is to take away the pass, and if Mahomes runs, he runs. You have to hope that your defensive line can help prevent that. As you see, nobody ends up picking up Kelce, and they're easily able to pick up a solid gain. Now, it's not the end of the world. If you're a Tampa Bay fan, you'll take that as if they have to come up with a good play design to get 7 yards, not the end of the world, but you still would like to have that not happen. And maybe the better move, too, on that play was you could have had just Devin White and Lavonte David sort of, just changed roles at a certain point where, okay, good play concept, but hey, Devin White, keep your eyes open. If you notice that the guy who you're covering is getting covered by someone else in zone coverage, look for someone else to cover. Kind of like as an offensive lineman, look for someone to hit. If you're a linebacker in coverage, look for someone to cover. Now let's show another example, because that one's tough, right? It's a good play concept by Kansas City. There's no right answer. I would like for Tampa Bay to sort of know the rules in their own system and be able to make it perfect, but again, it's a tall task against Kansas City. But this play, another cover 3 play, like I said, these might not be the best examples, but I think you can still learn a good amount from it, because it's really less about the coverage this time and more about just what the personnel is going to do. Watch, once this play starts, you notice that, so right there, Mecole Hardman, he's wide open over the middle of the field. So what would you expect? I mean, Lavonte David this time, he's not going to run 30 yards down the field to try and cover Hardman. That's not his job. He's pushing him back. David's doing the right thing right here, and he's finding someone else to cover, which is Travis Kelce. That's perfect coverage by Lavonte David. That's exactly what you want. That's actually a really good job by him. The issue is now you have 2 defensive backs deep. Someone has to pick up 17. It's just someone has to, but nobody is. And as you see, still no one picks him up, and you're going to see that makes it too easy for Patrick Mahomes. You just can't make things that easy for him. He can make really difficult throws. He's going to make the easy ones all of the time, and this is how not only could you get lit up against Mahomes, this is how they got lit up against, Taylor Heineke. This is how they had some bad performances against Matt Ryan, especially in that first game. It's not just zone coverage, but it's not understanding what to do in your zone. The best example probably being this second New Orleans game, where the second time they just said, we're going to play man because screw it. This time, they might want to play a lot more zone. They're probably going to play a good amount of cover 2 zone in this game. They're going to have to be good at it. Like, this one's another good example, and as much as I love Devin White, his coverage at times drives me crazy. It does. I think he's a great player. I think that he needs to learn to play better zone coverage. He's a big part of this is Devin White. It just is, and I think he's great, but, he has to clean this up, and now would be a great time to do it. So this is cover 2 zone, and I love cover 2 zone. I think it's a great coverage because, for one thing, you now have someone for every eligible receiver over the middle of the field. You kind of know where you are on the field, and you know who you have to look at. That's the main thing. What I mean by that is, I've circled Devin White. He's, middle of the field. He's the middle linebacker, and what do you do? So you're supposed to cover the number 3 receiver, right? The player who's closest towards the middle of the field. Why? Because there's 5 receivers, there can only be one number 3 receiver. The exception would be if there's 4 guys on one side of the field, but that's not the case on this play. If you see where they're all lined up, you notice that, okay, so there's, 2 receivers to Mahomes' left, 1 receiver to his right. You then have the tight end to his right and a back to his right. So the back is really the guy that White should be focusing on more because he knows he has 2 players to his left, 2 players to his right. So the odd guy, that's who we should just look at. If the back is then going to block or something, then you don't worry about it. But you have to make sure that if he's running a route, then you just have to cover someone to that side. It might not necessarily be the halfback, but just someone to the side, because keep in mind, you're covering the number 3 receiver. It can change as the play goes on. But right when this play starts, the back does run a route, so now someone else has to cover him, meaning that Travis Kelce is open right here, but Devin White is not doing a great job of staying here and clogging that gap, which he should be. He should have realized right when that ball was snapped, he has to look to his left. And I think part of the problem is just that, it looked like this might have been sort of a Tampa 2 situation. He's trying to run deep, but you should still know pre-snap sort of what to do. Take a second and then run deep because you've let someone be wide open right here. Now look at that safety deep, and this is why a mistake by a linebacker can really screw up the whole team. And this is a desperate situation. This is late in the game when Kansas City ended up just running out the clock and Tampa never got the ball back. So a touchdown is essentially just as bad as a couple first downs. So that's why he's going to take a chance. But he's going to run in and he's going to try and cover Kelce, which you can do. Obviously, there's risk to it. but you can do this. However, obviously the much preferred decision would be just for Devin White to have picked up Kelce immediately and not have to worry about this. So White just stays in the middle of the field doing whatever he wants, eventually finds Kelce, but at this point, notice that deep receiver. If Mahomes wanted to make this throw, he's not going to, but if he wanted to, this would have been wide open for a touchdown. And again, I don't know if you're going to do that if this is in the first quarter. I think the desperate times cause for, desperate measures or whatever it is. So I think that could be a factor. But this is just a good example of how one mistake can unravel a team. Mahomes ends up scrambling and pick up a first down, so it's all a moot point. But I just think that's a good example of showing sort of the dangers that can happen if you screw up your assignment. Don't screw up your assignment. Know what you have to do pre-snap, and I hope that Todd Bowles and these guys are sort of really looking down and saying, we can't make these types of mistakes. They've been making too many of those this season, and they made plenty against Kansas City. Some of them, like the first one, I'm far more willing to excuse because, it's cover 4, it's a good concept, whatever. This one, it's cover 2. You should know who you're supposed to look at, man. That's not a hard read. It really isn't. This one's another good example where, again, this is going to be a cover 2. So, same thing. You sort of know about what you should be doing before the ball is even snapped. It makes the reads a lot easier. But what's interesting is that Tyreek Hill is in motion. And this is another key factor that's going to be at play in the Super Bowl. Tyreek Hill in motion, they love to run motion. And this can kind of confuse you a bit. Because, if you're sitting here and you see there's 2 eligible receivers on your side of the field, and you're the strong or weak hook curl, which is basically, the guy who's not the flat, which is towards the sideline, but just one over. So not the middle, not the edge, the, in-between area. And that's where Devin White is here. So he might be thinking like, okay, there's 2 receivers. I'm going to be looking at the, the halfback. But now that Tyreek Hill is in motion, now your role has changed. And once Hill runs out, he's all the way to the number 1 receiver now. So now Devin White thought he was probably going to have to look at the halfback, but now he has to look at the guy who he thought was the number 1 receiver, who's now a number 2 receiver. On top of this, Kansas City's running a play action, which now means that it's a difficult read for him to make. And that's why that's one of the reasons Kansas City's so great, and one of the reasons Andy Reid is so great. He just makes these linebackers have to think a lot. And while I trust Lavonte David to do it, it's a tough task for Devin White. It really is. So right there, what you see on the screen, that's what Tampa Bay should be doing. That's what they should be doing. Devin White ends up covering the 2 receiver. You then have the corner on that side of the field. He covers the 1 receiver. What instead what they're doing is going to be this. As you see, they're both covering the 2 receiver, and nobody's covering Tyreek Hill. He's like the one guy you have to make sure you cover. But again, so I think, just watching that in real time, you would have been like, why is no one on Hill? Well, that's why. And so again, I say I'm picking on Devin White, and he had a lot to keep track of there. He actually did a good job on that one. That one wasn't his fault. So I think I set it up as though it was going to be White's fault. That's not what I was trying to do. It's Murphy Bunting's fault. But, he has to get over. But again, it's a lot to keep track of. Mahomes then is going to make this throw, and he, misses the throw. So, Murphy Bunting kind of got away with one, and Hill wasn't wide open. But it still is a good example. Just these little mistakes can be huge. I mean, how often have we seen Hill make a catch like that and then make a move and run for 50 yards? It happens. So even though these things seem minor, they can turn into major things. So yeah, I guess long story short, Tampa Bay's defense got to do better in zone coverage. I think that they'll probably play more man if possible, just because they're not that great at zone coverage. They have a lot of young players. All of their corners are young. Devin White is young. Lavonte David's obviously a veteran, so that helps. But, Carlton Davis is the oldest corner, and he's not that old. So they got some young guys, and that can be a factor, and that's something that Andy Reid will try to take advantage of for Tampa Bay. You know what you have to do? Just do it. And I think this could be big, where we've seen Kansas City win games with small ball, with these underneath, shorter passes. They obviously love to push the ball deep when it's there. I think Tampa Bay will try to take it away. So this game could actually be won or lost by these types of plays. And when they're in the right position, it's really tough to beat them. But at the same time, you could say that about every defense. So yeah, that's what I think. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. And of course, as always, thanks for watching.